Hi boys and girls, this is Miss Hanamio. We're going to be talking about our topic, rounding whole numbers to the nearest 10 or 100. Students, you will be able to round each number to the nearest 10 or 100 when you get to your assignment. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to think about is, why do we round numbers, or why is rounding or estimating important? So there are a couple different reasons. Sometimes you don't need to be as accurate when you're giving information or providing information. Sometimes you need a round, easy, friendly number to be able to use. So in this case, if you've often just worked around rounded numbers, exact numbers aren't necessarily needed. For example, if it takes about 26 minutes to get somewhere, it's just going to be simply easier to allow yourself to say, it's going to take 30 minutes as opposed to giving an exact amount like 26 minutes of travel time. Another example is if you're talking about money. So if you're talking about the cost of a loaf of bread, it would be easier to say it's going to be about $3 rather than a more exact amount of $2.89. Usually whenever your parents will give you money to go buy something, they'll give you a round dollar amount, so that way you have enough to make sure that you can pay for the item. So that's another way to think about rounding or estimating. Another reason is when we don't have to be exact. For example, if you're talking about the number of students at Rio Grande Elementary, it would be easier to say or work with a round friendly number like 400 than rather saying an exact number such as 388 students. Now, if you need to be exact, then you want to round to that closer amount as best as you possibly can. So if we had 4,000 students, let's just say for example, but we didn't want 4,568 students, but we didn't need to be exact, we could say, oh, that's going to be about 5,000 students. But the closer you want to get to that estimate, the closer you're going to move down in place values whenever you're rounding numbers. So let's talk about rounding to the closest 10. So we have our little boy here and he's thinking about this. How do I round to the closest 10? So first thing, we're thinking about a number. The number is 382. And we need to know, first of all, what two tens this number is going to fall between. Now, if you notice on our number line, we have numbers that are multiples of 10, but in between each one of those multiples of 10, we also have a halfway point, which is 5. We're going to use our ones place to decide if we're going to round up to the lower 10 or past 5 to round up to the upper end. So first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what two tens does my number fall between? So you'll see all the groups of 10 here between 3 and 400. And we know that if we look at the tens place, the 80 is there. So we know that the number comes between 380 and 390. Now remember, the hundreds place is still there. We can count by tens for as long as we need to. So just be careful not to drop the hundreds place off. We look for the 382 between the 380 and 385, or between the 385 and the 390. Well, we'll notice, since 385 is the halfway point, that 382 is before the 385. So we're looking at the ones digit to decide, is it less than 5 or greater than 5? And we know that 2 is going to be less than the 5. So we're going to know that it's going to round to 380. So now let's take the number 388. Same number line. We're going to look at, where does that fall on the number line? It falls past the 385. So again, if we look at our ones digit, we know that 8 is greater than the 5 in the ones place. And since it's greater than 5, we're going to round up. It's 2 away from 390, but it's 8 away from 380. So it's closer to 390. So we round it to 390. So is the ones place greater than 5? Yes, we always make sure we look at the ones place to make that determination. Okay, now let's take a look at rounding to the closest hundred. So again, we're going to use the same number line, but this time we're going to look at the 300 and the 400. Now the number again we want to round, the 382, is going to be between these two hundreds. So the two hundreds that number falls between are 300 and 400, which are at the very end of each part of that number line. Now, if we look and think about rounding to the nearest hundred, 50 is going to be our middle mark when we're deciding whether we're going to round to 300 or round to 400. So we're looking at the tens place, the place value to the right. We look at our place value to the right of the hundreds, and we see that there's an 8 or 80. Now, again, 50 is going to be our middle. So is the 80 greater than 50 or less than 50? Well, if we plot our point on our number line, we can see that that 382 is going to lie just past the 380. So that tells us that we are going to round up to the 400 as opposed to 300. Let's take the number 328 now. So all we did was change our digits. However, we made a different number. So 328 is going to lie on our number line right there, just past or right before the 330, just past the 320. So again, we look at our hundreds place, decide if the 20 is going to be past our halfway mark, which is 50. If it's not past 50, we're going to round to the lower hundred, which is 300. So now we've decided that our tens place is less than 50, so we're rounding down to 300. So now let's practice. So we have a number line here, and we'll notice that it's in multiples of 10, but at each end we have 300 and 400. So we have a candle here. The candle is 341 grams, but we don't want to know the exact amount, let's say. We want to know about how much it weighs. So we want to round to the closest 10, but we want to first decide what two tens does this number fall between. So if you look, it's between the 340 and 350. 40 is in the tens place, so we know that that has to be between that particular 10. Next, we want to think about where the middle is of 340 and 350. It's 345. So again, we're looking at our ones place to decide if it's going to round up or down. So we notice 341 is going to be less than 345, which is closer to 340. So now let's think about rounding to the nearest hundred. Our two hundreds that this number lies between is 300 and 400. So when we think about 341, we look at our tens place, because that's the place value we're going to look at if we're going to round to the nearest hundred. And we are looking to see if it's greater than 50, 350. So we want to say, okay, well, 341 is just before 350. So let's practice some more. If we had 295 balloons in a bag, If we had 295 balloons in a bag, we would want to start off by using a number chart. So if we were going to round this number of balloons, and we didn't want to know the exact amount of balloons that we had, but maybe we wanted to know about how many balloons we had, an accurate close estimate would be to the closest 10. So we would look for where that number is in the number chart. It's going to lie between 290 and 300. Remember, 300 is also a group of 10 when we're rounding to nearest tens as well. Then we're going to ask ourselves, what two tens does this number fall between? So the number falls between 290 and 300. The next thing we want to ask ourselves is to round to the nearest 100. So if we were going to round to the closest 100, we would see that the number falls between 200 and 300, which are on either end of our number chart. So if it's at 295, we know that 90 is past 50, and so we're going to round up to 300. That also would be helpful if you're also using a number line. So let's say, for example, we have 295 here on our number line. That's going to be where it is in the middle. Again, we're looking at the ones place to make that determination. Now, the rule is if it's right in the middle, we had to make a rule that we would either round up or down if 5 is in the ones place. So since 5 is in the ones place, we're going to have to round it up to 300. So we know that it's in between 290 and 300. So which one is it going to be closer to? It's going to be closer to 300. Now let's take a look at rounding to the closest 100 on the number line. It's going to be between 200 and 300. Okay, so now let's take a bottle of body lotion that has 625 milliliters of lotion in it. What if we don't need to know exactly how much lotion is in there? We can round that amount to the nearest 10. So let's take our number chart. If we were going to determine where 625 is on our number chart, we would want to see what two tens does this number fall between. So we look at our number chart and we can see that it's going to be between 620 and 630. Now, we're also going to round to the closest 100. So again, we want to ask ourselves, what two hundreds does my number fall between? So if we look at that row on either end, we're going to notice that 600 is on the left side and 700 is on the right side. Those are the two hundreds that my number falls between. We could also use our number line to determine where that where those tens and hundreds are rounding to. So if we look at our number line and we plot our point, 625, we can see that it's going to fall between 620 and 630, just like we said on the number chart. But now we have to decide what 10 does this number does this number round to? So if we look at our ones place, which is the place value to the right, we notice that it's right in the middle. It's at 5. So the rule is if it's less than 5, we round up. If it's 5 or greater, if it's less than 5, we round down. If it's greater or 5, then we round up. So since our ones place is 5 and it's right in the middle, our rule is we're going to round up to 630. Now we're going to look at rounding to the closest 100. So our number falls between 600 and 700. So again, we use our 50 mark to make a determination. Is this going to fall between 600? Is it going to be past 50 in our tens place or less than 50? Well, if we look at our tens place, we notice that it is less than 5, which means that it's 20. And so that means that it's going to round to 600. So now let's take a number of students at Rio High School. So let's say, for example, we don't need to know exactly how many students there are, but we need to know about how many students there are. So we would round to the closest 10. That's going to be a fairly accurate amount when we estimate. So where does that lie on our number chart? We ask ourselves, what two tens does this number fall between? So we notice that it's going to fall between 860 and 870. We also are going to want to know if it's a less accurate estimate, we're wanting to round to the closest 100. So if you look at what two hundreds does this number fall between, it's going to fall between 800 and 900. And since the tens place is greater than 50, we can also know that it's going to round up to 900. But we're going to do that also on our number line. So again, looking at our number line, we're going to plot our point. It's 869. It's right before 870. So we look at the two tens that it is between, which is 860 and 870. Then we are going to look at our ones place, the place value to the right. So in this case, we have 9 in our ones place. And our rule is if it's less than 5, which is 1, 2, 3, or 4, we round down to the lower 10. If it's greater than 5 in the ones place, we're going to round up to the greater 10, which would be 870. So we can see that it's only 1 away from 870, so it's going to be closer to 870. Now let's think about the closest 100. We have 800 and 900. So if we were thinking about 869 on our number line, reminder, when we're rounding to the closest 100, we're using 50 as our middle mark. So if we look at our tens place, again, we see a 6 in the tens place, which means 60. And so that's going to tell us that if it's less than 50, we round down to 800. But if it's greater than 50, we're going to round up to 900. Let's take 130 grams of sunscreen. If we want to round it to the nearest 10, we ask ourselves, what two tens does this number fall between? And in this case, it's going to fall between 100 and 110. Reminder, 100 is also going to be a group of 10. Now, we look at the ones place and decide, hey, it's less than 5. So if it's less than 5, the closest 10 that 103 would round to is 100. But you will also notice that when we round 103 to the nearest 100, it also falls between 100 and 200. And if we look at the tens place, we can definitely see that that tens place is less than 50. It's 0. So 103 is really close to 100. It's 3 away from 100, but it's 97 away from 200. So we would round 103 to 100. And now let's take a bottle of hand sanitizer. If that hand sanitizer was 236 milliliters, we could round that to the closest 10 by looking at our number chart. And we would, I guess I don't have them, there's the number chart. And so we could say 236 is going to round or be between 230 and 240. However, if we look at the ones place, we see that it's greater than 5, so that tells us to round up to 240. Rounding to the nearest 100, if we look at where it lies in the hundreds, between the hundreds, it's going to lie between 200 and 300. However, we notice that if we look at the place value to the right, it's less than 5, which is 30. So that tells us that we're going to round down to the lower 100, which is 200. Now you're going to complete an assignment, lesson 10, on rounding to the nearest 10 and 100. Please watch the video, and also if you haven't had a chance, you may want to watch the video on how I had you create a number line using loose leaf paper and where your multiples of 10 chart is in your blue DMA folder. Please remember, when writing your answers on a piece of paper, don't forget to number your paper and put your name and date in the right-hand corner. So if you have any other questions for this assignment, please don't hesitate to email me or text me through Schoology. And also, I will have a link to this, so if you just follow the link, there's more information, and hopefully that will clear everything up. So thank you and have a great day.